all turned into rubbles by Russian artillery fire, by Russian multiple launch rockets systems, and it's devastating. Now, I mostly discussed three issues here in Davos. The first one is weapons, with a special focus on multiple launch rocket systems. We need Russia overwhelms us in a number of heavy weapons, but the biggest disbalance is in multiple launch rocket systems. This is really the weapon that we badly need, and we are working with different countries on receiving them. Of course, we spoke about sanctions, and we are upset, to say the least, to see how the sixth sanctions package by the European Union is hanging in the air because of the veto, basically de facto veto imposed by Hungary. And in that regard, I took part in a couple of conversations and discussions on the energy security in the world, not only in Europe, to understand where we're heading to. The third issue is food security. Russia is now actively spreading the narrative that it is the Western sanctions that have to be blamed for the shortage of food and the unfolding food crisis in the world. Now, this is a clear example of deliberate disinformation. The only reason why the world is suffering from food shortages is the Russian blockade of Ukrainian ports. We are working closely with the United Nations and other actors on finding the way out of this critical situation. And the fourth point, so sorry, there were not three, but 4 points on my agenda. The fourth one is our application for EU candidacy status. This is not about immediate membership of Ukraine in the European Union. This is really about, being anchored in the EU integration project. So this was my agenda here in Davos. Now you pick the subject that you're most interested in. Ask questions before I go to survive 2 dinners.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to ask you about security guarantees for Ukraine. What should be the role of the European Union? What should be the role of the international community? Thank you.
Yes, it's a very good question, because basically what we see now is that new security architecture is needed, and this security architecture should resolve the issue of security for Ukraine. In 1994, we abandoned our third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and instead of guarantees, we received assurances, which never worked. NATO integration kind of hasn't flied so far. So this is we'll keep it in mind, and it's still part of our foreign policy. But we need something here and now. And therefore, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, put forward this idea of signing an agreement or agreements on security guarantees with the number of countries who are close partners of Ukraine and who are willing to provide our country with such guarantees. This dimension of our foreign policy is being led by President himself and Chief of his office, Mr. Andriy Yermak. And we as the Foreign Ministry are fully on board and do kind of our line of communication with foreign ministries of other countries. And now we are the good news is that in principle, partners and friends of Ukraine responded positively to the idea. The bad news is that we are still discussing how these security guarantees will look like. And because there are different views of who can guarantee what. And we have to come to a single vision on how to structure this process. So yesterday, Andriy Yermak announced the establishment of the international expert group, together with former Secretary General of NATO, where they will be kind of brainstorming these potential guarantees and discussing them further with partners who are willing to be part of this undertaking. But to cut a long story short, if the issue of security guarantees to Ukraine is not resolved one way or another, there will always be a risk of war in Europe as long as Russia remains Russia. Thank you.
Next one in the front row.
Do you hear me? Yes. Mr. Kuleba, I'm Tonia Mastrobuoni with the Italian newspaper La Repubblica. You mentioned food security. Could you update us exactly on solutions that were proposed by the Russians, like corridors? Would you accept them? What are you proposing? What do you want? And what did you discuss here at, with other partners as solutions to solve the blockade in the sea?
When did Russia propose a solution? I do not remember. The only statement...
Corridors.
No. The only statement I heard from Russia on this issue is that Russia will agree to lift blockade of Ukrainian ports if sanctions imposed against Russia are lifted. I never heard, correct me if I'm wrong, I never heard any initiative coming from Russia to create safe corridors. Yeah, no, I will. This is not the end of my answer, don't worry. Yes. The issue is very simple. This is the issue of the food security on one hand, but it's also the issue of security of Odessa on the other hand. So when we agree theoretically that there will be a safe passage of commercial vessels to and from Odessa to pick up Ukrainian grain and take it to the global market, this will require demining of the harbor. In principle, we agree to that. And the harbor was mined by the Russians, by the way, in the very first days of the war. In principle, we are ready to do it, but we have one security issue that needs to be addressed. How to guarantee that the moment we will create this safe passage and the entry to the harbor is demined, how to make sure that at night or early in the morning, Russia will not violate the agreement on the safe passage, and its military vessels will not sneak into the harbor and attack Odessa. So in the end, the whole story with this corridor is an issue of trust with Russia. As you could probably imagine, this is quite problematic. Trust in Russia is a big issue. So now we are working with the United Nations to find the way how to address this security concern. And it is also the security concern not only of Ukraine, but also of the countries whose vessels and shipping companies whose vessels will be involved in it, because you do not want your vessels to be held hostages by the Russian offensive on Odessa from the sea. So there are many security risks associated with it, but we are ready to work constructively on all of them, because we have always been reliable suppliers of reliable guarantors of global food security, and we are not interested in the global food crisis by all accounts, starting with selling grain and making money for the economy that is suffering from the shortage of revenues, and ending up with making sure that we remain reliable guarantors of food security. So whatever the solution is, in the end, there will always be an issue, a question: can we trust Russia? The one who gives a positive answer to that question and can guarantee that we are not making a mistake will be the savior of the world from global food crisis.
Next one, the man in the front line. Yeah. Thank you. This is Bayram Altu, Turkish journalist from United Nations Geneva office. You had a meeting with Mr. Lavrov in Antalya Diplomacy Forum in March. My question about the Turkey's mediation role. What would you like to say about Turkey's effort to mediation efforts between Ukraine and Russia? And do you still believe that the war in Ukraine can be ended through diplomacy? Thank you.
All wars end through diplomacy in the end. The question is, what will be your position at the moment when you enter the diplomatic stage? For the time being, we do not see any appetite in Russia for negotiations, and the offensive in Donbás speaks for itself. When you want to solve the conflict through diplomacy, you are not throwing thousands of tanks, airplanes, and artillery on into the offensive operation. Turkey, among all countries who, for different reasons, proposed their mediating services, Turkey succeeded the most. And the meeting of two delegations, Russian and Ukrainian, in Istanbul was basically the highest point in the negotiating process. Everything that followed afterwards was a downfall. And as I told you, it's hard for me to remember when was the last time that the working groups of this bilateral negotiation format actually held their sessions. We don't see. We see a cover-up operation from Moscow. They regularly make statements. Ukraine doesn't need diplomacy. Ukraine doesn't want to talk with us. But it's just a cover. It's a smoke. It's cover-up operation. Because on a parallel track, they conduct an offensive in Ukraine, in Donbás. President Putin today signed the decree facilitating issuance of Russian passports to residents of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions of Ukraine. You do not do these things when you want to negotiate in good faith. As simple as that.
One more woman in the front row. I think it's NTV, right? Germany. Okay. Yeah.
Isabel Kerner, thank you. President Zelensky said that Ukraine needs $5 billion a month immediately to stave off economic collapse. Has Davos brought you closer to this sum? And how far is your country from economic collapse?
You know, everyone is always waiting for Ukraine to collapse, and it never does. On the eve of the months and weeks before the aggression started, okay, I'll tell you a short story. A couple of days before Russia actually attacked Ukraine, there was a serious meeting with serious people from different countries sitting down, all of them friends of Ukraine, and they tried to calculate different scenarios. And the unanimous conclusion was that Ukraine will not survive. It will collapse in 3, maybe in 7 days. I'm still talking to you. Thank you for asking the question. So the same goes for economy. We are more resilient than one might think. Yes, but it's true. We need $5 billion per month to uphold macro-financial stability, simply because Russia deliberately destroys one piece of our economy after another. I think this issue will be solved through through 3 sources. The first one is this support coming from the European Union. The second will come from international financial institutions. And the third source will be the United States. These are the 3 biggest sources. Then there will be other countries who will be supporting specifically our macro-financial stability. It's not financing projects. It's just giving money to the budget to keep the country running. But we do not want taxpayers of friendly countries to carry the burden of this. So we are making the point, and I see, and I discussed it here in Davos, and I see a lot of kind of responsiveness to that. It's time to speed up introduction of regulations and procedures that will allow not only the freeze of Russian assets, not only the seizure of Russian assets, but also the transfer of assets to Russia. Russia must pay for the damage it causes, it inflicts. I think it will be fair.
Let's go to AFP.
Hi, Laurent Thomé with AFP. You mentioned at the beginning that even though Davos has this reputation of being just talk, you did get some agreements here. And on the list of things you came to talk about here, the top two were more weapons and more sanctions. But as you leave, you still don't have more weapons and more sanctions. Do you think that Davos was really helpful for you in those two matters?
In terms of mathematics, you are absolutely right. I will arrive in Kiev before new weapons arrive or new sanctions are introduced. But this is the political process. It takes time. I'm more concerned with the issue of sanctions now, with the issue of this, with the prospects of the sixth package, than with the issue of weapons. I think that weapons, some weapons that we discussed here today, will be on their way pretty soon, while we will still have to wait for the European Union to sort out the issue of the sixth package.
Sorry, so but this trip was
It's my first time in Davos, so in terms of enriching my personal experience, yes, of course, it was very useful.
Let's go to second, third row because I think we don't want to offend people. Yeah, you're on the right. Just wait for the microphone.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt the press conference for a second.
Hold on, there's not many calls that he would answer anyway. So.
Mr. Zelensky.
Yeah, 99%. You can reflect on your questions now.
Maybe you tell us some breaking news.
Me? No. Okay, we're back and let's proceed with the question, right?
Thanks for coming back.
I'm sorry.
Michael Brecher, Der Spiegel, Germany.
Oh no, don't ask me about weapons from Germany.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm sorry, Mr. Kuleba. Olaf Scholz is going to come here to Davos tomorrow. Germany, as you know, has been reluctant at first when it came to German weapon deliveries. Is there anything that you can ask from him? And what are your expectations when it comes to German weapon deliveries?
My expectations from what? From Germany?
From Germany, yeah, when it comes to weapons deliveries.
We appreciate every effort. Now, back to diplomacy. We appreciate every effort made by the German government to find heavy weapons which it can share with Ukraine to help us defend ourselves. We understand it's more difficult for Germany than for others. So we decided to follow this development with strategic patience. Personally, I'm just curious how it ends. I've been in this process from the very beginning. I don't understand why it is so complicated, but I respect the situation in the German government, and we're looking forward to see how this story ends. Speaking more broadly, of course, something that we think is feasible is these Marders, armored vehicles. And our dream, of course, is German Leopard tanks. But we are not even close to, we are not there. Everything else is in process. Our soldiers are being trained on these Panzer howitzers. It's the joint German-Dutch collaboration. We appreciate that. There is this saga with Gepards. You may need some popcorn to, to follow it until the end. There are some other issues which we brought up with Germany. We are looking forward to hearing from them how feasible this is. I think it's an issue. It's not an issue. We clearly understand that Germany will not be the country that will lead the process of supplying Ukraine with heavy weapons we need. And let's get clear: if we don't get heavy weapons, we get killed. It's where you can quote me. Those countries who are dragging their feet with the issue of providing Ukraine with heavy weapons, they have to understand every day they spend deciding, weighing different arguments, whether to do it or not. People get killed, soldiers, civilians, towns and villages being destructed. Because if Russia has multiple launch rocket systems to cover our village and to even it with land, with earth, and we don't have to destroy Russian positions and prevent them from doing it, this is it. So if we don't get all necessary heavy weapons, this will cause more deaths and damage. We are very honest with this. Sometimes I hear criticism that we push too far. I'm sorry, if your people were dying every day in such numbers, I'm sure that Germany would be pushing even more against everyone else to help them. So I do not wish anything what we are going through to the people of Germany, don't get me wrong. But as I said, so it's not about the quantities or the leadership. We definitely see that Germany doesn't seem to be the one on this. But there are some specific requests which we have, and if Germany finds the way to accommodate them, we will be grateful. If it doesn't happen, of course, you will ask me this question again, and I will tell you more.
Gentleman in the back row.
Good evening, Mr. Minister. Lorenzo Borga from Sky News Italy. What's your position on the so-called Italian plan for peace presented by the Italian Foreign Minister?
Luigi Di Maio is a friend, so in principle I will not have anything against proposed by a friend. Politically speaking, I want you to understand one thing. We welcome all kinds of plans that do not imply establishment of another contact line and any concessions by Ukraine with regard to our territorial integrity and sovereignty over certain territories. Everything else, we are open to discussions. But, as I said many times before, we've been, we already had our Minsk, we already had the contact line, we already had endless discussions in the trilateral contact group, and it brought us to where we are. We are not going to step into the same footprint again. So no plan that will mean freezing the current situation will be supported by Ukraine. Because, for example, we hear political kind of statements, ceasefire is needed. We agree that ceasefire is needed. But I give you 100%. The moment Russia will agree to a ceasefire will be the moment when it will be one step away from losing the war. And they will agree to a ceasefire with only one purpose, to save themselves from losing the war. Until then, this war will continue. And we sincerely appreciate every effort aimed at finding a diplomatic solution. But what we see now on the ground and from the analysis of the decisions taken by Kremlin, they are focused on the war, not on diplomacy.
We have time for a few last ones. Let's take your gentleman. Yeah, in the center of the second row. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shinya Wake. I'm the reporter for the Japanese newspaper, the Asahi Shimbun. My question is about your about the diplomatic stage you mentioned, and it's very difficult. But what at least do you need from your side to sit on the table for the negotiation to start this diplomatic stage to end this tragedy? And one more question, if I may. You've explained a lot about how the cities and villages have destroyed. How long do you think is needed to restore after this war has ended?
We do not have any preconditions for restarting diplomatic negotiations with Russia. We are not saying stop this and that. Emotionally, it's extremely painful for us to sit at the table with them after all the atrocities committed by Russian army in Ukraine. But we are ready to control emotions if it helps us to bring peace and restore our territorial integrity. So we do not have any preconditions. The problem is that Russia is not sending kind of any messages. It's really willing to sit down and talk in good faith. The key thing is in good faith. If Russia sees negotiations as it did in the first months of the war, throwing papers on the table and saying, take it or leave it, these are not negotiations. This is not diplomacy. This is bullying. And this is something that we will not accept. Timeline for recovery of Ukraine will depend on two things. First, the amount of money attracted and the efficiency of implementation of relevant projects. It can be 5 years, can be 10, can be 20, depends on these two factors. We are, of course, seeing this now as a way to basically rebuild the country. The question will be how to convince people to go back to live in the regions close to the Russian border when they will know that this life can end at any moment because Russia may decide to advance again. So it's a broad and complicated question, but I do not have a definite answer to how much time it takes, but the sooner the better.
Let's take one last one from the AP who wants from the very beginning.
All right, Minister. Jamie Keaton from Associated Press. You mentioned that there would need to be some sort of an agreement to be able to get food out of the port, particularly through Odessa. There was also an agreement a few weeks ago to help people evacuate from Mariupol, people who were able to get out. Is that a positive sign in the possibility of seeing at least some sort of agreement between the two sides? And if I could just get you to comment further on that issue, the people who may have been taken out of there, do you still have concerns about Ukrainians that may be held either by in Russian-held areas right now?
The evacuation of civilians and soldiers from Azovstal in Mariupol is a miracle. And I can say openly that we thank the United Nations Secretary General and Red Cross for facilitating this process. It also took many phone calls and many hours of difficult consideration and decision-making for President Zelensky. But in the end, it all worked. Time will come when we will be free to speak about the reasons why Russia agreed to this operation. For the time being, I will stay silent because I can only talk when I see all of them coming back to the government-controlled territory. Now everything is very fragile and we want to save their lives, we want to protect them. So I will stop here. But we are facing a much bigger problem of forcible deportations of Ukrainian citizens into the territory of Russia. I do not know the number, how many Ukrainians were forcibly deported, because Russia doesn't share it with anyone. We don't know where these people are. And what I could do, we made public statements saying that, guys, those of you who can hear us, read us online, hear us on television, if you are in Russia, but you want to go back to Ukraine, you cannot do it directly. But if you reach any embassy in the country neighboring Russia, be it Belarus, Georgia, for example, come to the embassy, identify yourself, and we will get you out. This is peanuts compared to the overall number, because I'm afraid the overall number of forcibly deported people will be in hundreds, thousands. But if I can save one family, one person, Ukrainian diplomacy will do that. And your first question was on what?
It was just about whether or not the agreement could it be...
Yes, hopefully. I despite being a diplomat, I believe in miracles. So yes, hopefully it will work. It will work again, and this is why I mentioned that we continue working with the United Nations on building this safe passage corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, and thank you, media.
Thank all of you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.